Okay, good morning members, guests, members of the public. Good morning Mr Punchin.
Good morning.
Very impressed to see you on holiday wearing a shirt and tie. It's very good work.
Slopes that.
Yes, that
I apologise for the lack of jacket.
Yeah, that's quite right. It looks like a ski chalet. Are you skiing or are you...
I am indeed, yes.
You're skiing, in which case apologies for losing the morning on the slopes.
Absolutely fine.
Right, okay. Members, item 1 is apologies for absence and Chairman's announcements. We've had apologies from Sean Berry AM, I believe, is that correct? No substitution?
No substitution.
Everybody else appears to be present and correct, so that's good. Item 2, declarations of interest. Can you note the declarations that are in the paperwork? Are there any others that anyone would wish to give at this stage? No. Item 3, minutes of the previous meeting. We're recommended to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 4th, 5th and 10th of January, which were the budget-related meetings that we had, to be signed by me as a correct record. Is that agreed? Thank you. Summary list of actions. We're recommended to note the completed and outstanding actions arising from previous committee meetings. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Okay, item 5, which is the main item of business today, concerns the use of land and property in the Greater London Authority Group. Our guests today, James Murray, the Deputy Mayor for Housing, Simon Powell, who is the Assistant Director of Strategic Projects and Property at the GLA, Matthew Punchin, who is on the big screen over there, Rebecca Lawrence, the Chief Executive from MOPAC, and Graham Craig, who is very familiar to this committee, the Director of Commercial Development from Transport for London. Welcome to you all. Thank you very much indeed for giving up your meeting today. As outlined, the purpose of today's meeting is to look at the various different approaches to the use of land and property in the GLA group. As is traditional with these meetings, I'll start with some scene-setting questions around mayoral priorities, and the first one inevitably will go to you, James. What does the Mayor want to do with the GLA Group's land?
Well, as you know, Chair, the Mayor's priority is to take a hands-on approach in terms of delivering new homes in London, to bring forward more land for housing generally, and to increase the proportion of affordable housing which is built through those developments. And so, as you know, within the context of his long-term strategic target of raising affordable housing towards half of all new homes being affordable, there's several different levers he can use in order to increase the level of affordable housing. So whether that's using planning gain through the supplementary planning guidance he issued, alongside the funding programme, which he agreed with government, which will work hand in hand with the planning regime, and public land as well for increasing new and affordable homes. And I think the priority in terms of GLA group land is to bring forward land at pace, to bring forward it quicker for housing development where possible, and to have a real focus on delivering housing as well as just receipts. So it's a sort of twin track approach, making sure we're getting the receipts to support the business plans of the various different functional bodies in the GLA group more widely, but also having a focus on delivery of housing numbers at the same time and affordable housing. And in a way that kind of fits, I think, with a kind of emerging principle from national government as well, which is that when they're talking about bringing forward public land for development, it's not simply to get the receipt, although that's essential. It's also to make sure there are targets in terms of building homes on those land and getting it into market, getting it into production and so on. So those two twin aims are very much interlinked. And as I say, I think the focus on delivering housing units to making sure they're actually brought into production is something which has been recognised, you know, across the board, I think nationally as well as in London. And it's one that I think government would be sympathetic to, about ensuring there are sort of development agreements, there are plans for getting land actually built, getting homes actually built on land rather than simply disposing of assets. So that's really an indicator of how the Mayor's approach, he intends to be much more hands-on in terms of making sure the land comes forward and then gets built out with new homes. Do you see any tension between the need to generate receipts and to develop homes? I think both of the targets are clearly stretching. You know, we want to maximise the number of homes we're building, build them quickly, build more affordable housing, generate receipts. There's a strong set of targets there to meet. I think what we've been able to set out, and Graham I'm sure can give more detail on this if you need it, but with the TfL sites, for instance, which have come forward in the first year, there's been 4 sites which have been brought to market, and they're all on track to deliver 50% on average affordable housing and to exceed the estimated income in the business plan. So we are showing that it is possible to generate substantial income, substantial homes, substantial levels of affordable housing by working very closely between the team at the GLA and the functional bodies. You know, it does require looking at a cross-portfolio approach. and making sure that we're working out the best way to bring sites to market and so on. But it is possible to make sure that we meet different aims.
Okay. There's going to be a number of issues that I think we're going to tease out as time goes on, not least the cross-portfolio approach and also the issue of pest consideration, which I think we'll probably come back to at some point. I don't want to do that now because I'll be querying the pitch for others. Next question really is going to go to Graham, Craig, Matthew Punchin and Rebecca Lawrence in turn, which is how high on your agenda are the Mayor's strategic priorities when looking at options for surplus land? I think I can imagine the answers you're going to give, but I'll give you the chance to give them. So starting with you, Graham.
Okay. I guess I should begin by just explaining sort of the wider context. Commercial revenue is clearly critical to TfL, particularly in the context of the loss of government grant. Property development is important both in terms of housing and revenue, but I think sort of more broadly what's been enormously helpful for me is the fact that the Commissioner, Mike Brown, has made plain that commercial activity is one of the reasons why TfL exists. I sit as one of 3 operational members on the executive committee in TfL. You know, there are 3 operational businesses: surface transport, London Underground and commercial development. So that's Mike's way, and it's very important from an internal as well as external point of view to say that commercial activity is important to the organisation. It's one of the reasons why the organisation exists. We have large numbers to hit in terms of property development activity within the business plan through to 21-22. It's £850 million. On top of that, we're due to grow our operating income from £179 million last year to £340 million a year by 21-22. Now what we've said, and this is absolutely clear and will be in TfL's scorecard next year, is sat alongside those large ambitious commercial targets, we will be delivering on an annual basis 50% affordable housing. So that's not just my target, but that's a target that will sit next year on TfL's scorecard. So this is at the heart of, it is central to what TfL is tasked with delivering.
That 50% target, is that on every single development or is that aggregated across all developments?
That's an average across the portfolio as measured by habitable rooms.
Okay.
As it happens.
Over what period of time?
The target that I have is over the 4 years, but on an annual basis we will be measuring as part of the TfL scorecard our ability to hit the 50% affordable.
So you'll be measuring it on an annual basis, that's fine.
We're measuring it on a scheme-by-scheme basis. As part of the scorecard for next year will be 50% affordable housing, and those will be on the sites that we bring to market. In due course, of course, as schemes are developed out, we'll be able to measure not just on those schemes that are brought to market, but actually in terms of homes built on the ground. Okay.
So there is room for slippage within those targets, though. So if, say, for example, this year you don't hit 50% on everything you bring forward, you can make that up next year or in year 3 or in year 4. Is that correct?
We hit 50% this year. I'm expecting to hit 50% next year, and the scorecard, as measured at a TfL basis, upon which my performance is measured, is assessed on an annual basis.
Okay. Matthew, over in the Alps or wherever it is, where are you actually?
Morsey.
Okay. Never been there myself, so I hope the snow's good. Same question to you then, really. How high on the agenda are the main strategic priorities for you?
Actually, I'm going to pass to Rebecca to start this, and I'll talk specifically about the property aspects of it.
Okay.
If I may, Chair, I think that will be helpful. So from MOPAC's point of view, we have a legal duty to ensure the efficiency and effectiveness of the Met Police and to work within wider mayoral priorities. So what does this mean for us now at this stage of our policy development? Well, obviously, for an effective police force, we're currently consulting on, and we've just finished the consultation on our police and crime plan. So we want an estate that supports the strategic priorities within that police and crime plan. We also need to ensure efficiency. You'll be aware that the Met has taken out a lot of cost, 600 million over the last mayoralty, another 400 million to come out in this mayoralty, and that's on a turnover of 3.2 billion in 2013, to just give you a sense of the scale. we want to continue reducing the running cost of buildings, as the last mayoralty did, and to generate capital receipts to reinvest in the kind of modern buildings that policing needs, and to be able to reinvest in the technology needed. So when we sell surplus land, our priorities are we have to look at value, and we have to look at efficiency and effective of policing, but we must also look at wider mayoral priorities. So that is the process that we are working through at the moment. I think in all areas of public policy there are often trade-offs and debates and issues to work through. We've committed to finding ways where we can achieve that 50% affordable housing across our portfolio in a way that minimises, that's most compliant with efficiency and effectiveness of the Met. And so we're in very good and productive discussions with the GLA about how to achieve that, as well as, and complementary to, that estate strategy that is most in line with the operational needs of policing now, supporting the priorities in this police and crime plan.
Okay, we're going to get into that in a lot more detail.
Yes.
We've got an entire section reserved for you and Matthew a bit later on, so I don't want to ask any supplementaries now. Matthew, did you want to add anything to that opening remark?
No, it's fine. I think, as you say, we'll get into the detail in a later question on that. So.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, James, back to you. How do you work with the functional bodies to ensure that they consider the Mayor's strategic priorities when making decisions on land? We've obviously got a wide variety of functional bodies, and they all seem to have slightly different approaches. So part of your role is going to be coordinating that. How do you do that?
Well, that's right. That's absolutely right, Chair. In that, what's really characterised the way we've been operating since last May is by having a very close relationship between the kind of housing and land team here at the GLA and with the functional bodies to work out how to meet the housing objectives alongside the other objectives the functional bodies need to hit. And so we've been working very closely with them on their strategies for land, on identifying opportunities, agreeing strategies for development or disposal, what the kind of mechanisms are for making sure that we hit affordable housing targets across the portfolio, and so on. But I think it's important to say we recognise there is the approach does need to be tailored to fit the different characteristics of the different functional bodies. So it isn't necessarily possible to have a singular, exactly the same approach for TfL's development as it is for MOPAC and the Met's sites, because they have slightly different arrangements governing them, slightly different abilities, slightly different things they've inherited, and so on. So we do it with a consistent set of aims, but with a kind of flexible approach that recognises a slightly different situation the different functional bodies find themselves in.
Yeah, I think that's another subject that we're going to explore in a bit more detail a bit later in the meeting. What are the main changes that you have made, or that the mayoral administration have made since May from what was going on before?
I think as a sort of baseline, the much closer relationship between housing and land and between TfL, MOPAC and the Met in terms of coming up with their property strategies and their development strategies has been really essential. Because there's a great deal of experience at the GLA in terms of bringing land forward, getting it developed, building homes at pace, and so on. And so that kind of understanding and knowledge and experience and such of practices has been really important to make sure is integrated in the approach of TfL and of MOPAC and the Met as well. Because what we need to do is make sure that we're all, it sounds like an obvious thing to say, but we're all working towards the Mayor's objectives. Which is to both generate the income from the sites and the homes and affordable homes.
The reason I'm smiling slightly wryly at that comment is, of course, what you said is absolutely correct, but there's been a wide different interpretation of that amongst functional bodies for many years. I agree entirely with what you've just said, but observing the functional bodies over the years has been an interesting experience in terms of how they each work towards the Mayor. And as an example of that, I suppose, we've got, on the one hand, the Met's approach has been to dispose of land and generate capital receipts to fund their capital programme. TfL's now, as we've just heard, is very much about driving a revenue stream to support their core operations. Do you see any tension between those two approaches in terms of fulfilling the Mayor's core priorities?
Well, I think, and this may well be where people from the functional bodies want to come in as well. But that's in a way an example of how the positions and the situations the different functional bodies are in are slightly different. So TfL, has slightly more latitude in that it can act as a commercial enterprise. they can assemble and develop land and so on, whereas MOPAC and indeed LFIPA have more kind of tightly defined statutory functions where they can, they can only buy and sell land to deliver those functions. So there's slightly different environments they find themselves in. I suppose that sort of relates to my earlier answer about there needing to be slightly different approaches for the different functional bodies, and that, as I say, TfL can act more commercially to assemble land and develop it in a way that maybe MOPAC is unable to.
Rebecca, do you want to add to that?
No, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, I think in the drafting of the Police Crime and Social Responsibility Act, I think quite tight parameters were put, because I think the government's intention was that the Home Secretary and then should ensure that police grant is used for policing purposes. So that's the context in which we find ourselves. So I think when the national hits the London, then it takes for creative and collaborative policy making to see how you can stretch that envelope and make efficient and effective policing work side by side with the duty to Londoners to see that there's affordable housing. And I would say, in terms of working styles, it's refreshingly collaborative, I think would be what I say. There's respect for each part of the mayoral family's legal position and sort of cultural tradition, if you may say, and rubbing points are entirely the ones about the balancing of different public policy objectives, which is an inherent part of what we find ourselves in. But on a human basis, it's all extremely collaborative, if that makes sense.
It does. That was quite a development on No, I've got nothing to add, which is good. We like those kind of answers. Graham, have you got anything to add?
I guess just to sort of make the obvious point that transport is a land-intensive exercise. We own 5,500 acres of land in London. We will continue to have substantial land ownerships around London. For many decades, we've sold off land in London. We generally don't have large tracts of easily developable land now. The land that we have is operationally constrained. It's inextricably bound in with the transport network. It's part of the reason why we've had to make the investment we've had, not just in the development team, but the engineering, the procurement, the financial, the comm support, because you need to work hard to unlock the opportunity. But if you can do that, if you can unlock the opportunity, you can retain the land ownerships, you can enable the transport system, indeed improve, through providing things like step-free access. You can improve accessibility, you can improve the transport network, and do so in a way in which you're also generating either capital receipts or ongoing revenues. And it's been my approach for a long time. I think if you're an organisation like TfL that owns 5,500 acres of land in London, frankly, whether you accept it or not, you are a property company. And once you've accepted that, then you really ought to have the people, the processes, the systems that you'd expect to see in a significant property company.
Okay, I'm going to bring Simon in now, because you've been sitting very patiently. The Mayor obviously has at his disposal quite a large amount of public land through the functional bodies, but he's not the only public land holder in London. There are many others, local government, NHS, Network Rail, etc. Does the Mayor work as a facilitator with other public sector bodies to free up land to increase the delivery of things like affordable housing?
Yeah, very much so. We have, as the GLA officers, we have regular bilateral meetings with all of the key significant public sector landowners across London. So, for example, the Ministry of Justice, Ministry of Defence, Network Rail, and the Department of Health, NHS. And that very much is to look at the portfolio of land that they've got, to look at where we can work with them to accelerate the identification of what could be surplus over time, how we can get it into the market. One of the things that I know James has already touched on briefly is about the need for housing to actually physically come forward rather than just land getting into the market. So there's the whole piece about using framework panels like the London Development Panel to actually make sure that there are delivery obligations on suitably sized sites to come forward with housing and with the relevant proportions of affordable. We look to work individually with those different bodies in relation to individual opportunities to specifically unlock sites. So we're doing wider work at the moment with the London Estates Board in relation to the NHS world to actually look at what are some of the issues that are holding up the freeing up of non-operational land across the NHS estate. We're working with the government's One Public Estate programme to look at how we can work with them to bring in funding, particularly some revenue funding up front on some of the large government landowners across London. And we're also engaged at the moment, the Mayor's meaningfully engaged at the moment with government on looking at a land protocol across the Whitehall departments in relation to the release of land, and for the Mayor to be sort of very much up front in the discussions of what that land can come forward for, and how these frameworks can be enshrined within that, because as I said, and as James has mentioned, there's a very much alignment between the Mayor and the government that the land needs to come forward in the appropriate way for housing, and it needs to actually be delivered.
Well, that last point, I'm imagining, is a fairly recent development, is it?
It's over the last couple of months, yeah, so it's a recent development.
The previous work, so for example, unlocking the NHS land that's not needed for operational use, how long has that been going on for?
That again, it's work over since the Mayor came in last May.
Okay, so it's all new work.
Particularly the London Estates Board and the work around that is a new organisation that's only just been recently set up. We've had 2 meetings to date. There's a third one on Thursday. So that is a big emerging work stream that the Mayor has been involved in.
Is it possible at this stage to give an indicative timetable of when results will start to be born from that? Because it all sounds very good, but I think there's general recognition across the board that freeing up land for particularly housing development is a really pressing need in London. So when can we start to expect to see results come from these developments?
There already are some good positive progress that's been made on actual individual sites. And I mean, in terms of a timeline trajectory, I'm happy to send you some information outside of this meeting for you.
Yeah, what we'll do at the end, we tend to write to all of our guests to thank you for coming, so we'll remind you of that in the letter we'll send to you, if that's okay. And if it can come back, I'll circulate it to the committee. Assembly Member Cooper.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wondered if I could ask something to Graham. If at all possible. Obviously you talked about some of the difficulties with the TfL sites, and I think we all acknowledge that there are some sort of physical issues with accessing some of them, but there's also something quite attractive about the idea of doing a development where you've got the transport hub, the transport interchange, with the housing over perhaps some sort of commercial development below. And I just wondered whether there's any noticeable impact in terms of appetite for that kind of commercial development with the housing above, given the current issues about business rates, and I think it's a bit unstable at the moment in terms of both the potential rises, whether there's going to be help from the budget this week, and given we're in London at the size of those rises, and whether people might just back off from that type of development at the moment.
Okay, that's a big question. As I'm sure you know. There's a whole variety of things at play here. We've got the wider macroeconomic position, we've got business rates, there are subtler, sometimes not so subtly different views in central London versus outer London. I guess the strategic point from my perspective is we absolutely, as James has already set out, in order to address the affordable housing and the financial challenges, including the mix between residential and commercial, we absolutely have to take a portfolio-wide approach. We need to prioritise some sites for affordable housing, prioritise some for financial return, and certainly when thinking about financial return, it's understanding, on a site-by-site basis, the appropriate mix between residential and commercial. And in doing so, there's a wider imperative here. We're talking about potentially tens or hundreds of developments across London. It's important that we get it right. It's important we don't simply create unattractive dormitories above our stations for people to catch an early train into London and a late train home. We have to think about placemaking, we have to think about legacy, we have to recognise the fact that London has a whole variety of villages and towns and cities, and ensure the development that we do connects into and reflects those different parts of London. There isn't a simple cookie cutter approach that we could just drop on top of stations across London. It's hard work. You've got to understand on a site-by-site basis what the appropriate scale of development is, what's the appropriate mix of development. One of the things that is working really very well that we're pleased with is our property partnerships panel, where we've got, and we'll talk about small developers later no doubt, but we've got 13 of the leading developers in London. So we're talking to them on a pretty much continual basis about the sites that are coming up. We're therefore getting their views on what form of development, their appetite in different parts of London. You know, that means that we're now extraordinarily aware at a sort of local level almost as to where the market is in London, and that helps to shape the plans that we've got, because clearly we want to be in a position in which the sites that we're bringing to market will be attractive to the market, including in particular those people who are on our panel. So, you know, there's a lot of work that we're doing, you know, with a very large number of sites, trying to understand the sequencing of sites, driven by the market, driven by the need to hit that mixture of the affordable housing and the financial targets, ensuring that what we're doing is sort of works from a placemaking point of view. I think in terms of from an asset management point of view, things like our existing tenants, I've got to say this sort of, at the moment things are okay on the ground. We'll see what the impact is of the rates. We're not getting a huge amount of pushback and concern at the moment. It's something that we're conscious of. It's something that we are attuned to, and the property management function, who the people who, the team that I have, who have the day-to-day liaison with our existing tenants, particularly our retail tenants, are aware that we may have some tenants who are having problems, or that may emerge, and we're ready to deal with whatever that means, individual issues on a case-by-case basis. Clearly we don't want to be in a position in which, not just from a financial point of view, but in terms of providing the service that our customers want on a daily basis, we don't want retail units going under because of whether it's rates or the wider market or anything else.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Jonathan.
Well, we move on to talk about strategy across the GLA group, and Assemblymember Duval's going to lead on that part.
Initially to Simon and James, can you just centrally, what's the relevant structures and programmes that are in place within the GLA group on the use of land? You've mentioned a couple earlier on, so the question is, can we just have it all together, what you think those mechanisms are? So Simon first, you want to...
I think the key thing is, and certainly new initiative since the Mayor came in last year, is Homes for Londoners, which is a new initiative to bring together an alliance of all the key players across the housing sector to strengthen the GLA's output in terms of housing and development capacity, and also to support the Mayor's wider ambitions in terms of housing delivery, and to build the many tens of thousands of new homes that London so critically needs. The Homes for Londoners setup will work and is working a lot closer with London boroughs across the functional bodies as is being demonstrated today, housing associations, developers, home builders, investors, and also, importantly, central government to boost home building in London. And the board itself, the Homes for Londoners board, is now fully set up. The first meeting was last December, and the Mayor himself actually chairs that board, and it brings together the GLA, Transport for London, London councils on behalf of the boroughs across London, the G15, which is the largest organisation which represents the largest housing associations in London, together with a couple of representatives from the wider London property sector. And at the first meeting last December, there were 3 task and finish groups that have been established. One looking at skills and capacity across the sector, which is a really key issue going forward. Another one is looking at new models of housing delivery, particularly in relation to innovative investment that could come forward. and the third one is looking at the role of overseas buyers within London's property market. That is the overall, as I said, Homes for London is the key structure effectively that the Mayor has now established, that is bringing this forward in the next second meeting of the board is later this March.
Effectively advises the Deputy Mayor stroke Mayor
Yeah.
on the decisions they take.
Yes.
Right? There's no power to that group. They don't take decisions. They receive papers, or do they say we're having a vote? I mean, how many votes have we had since the board has been established, or don't you do voting on the board? How does it work?
Shall I come in on that one? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, we don't do voting on the board. It's, so, I mean, the formal role of the board is advisory to the Mayor, so to advise the Mayor on how to implement his housing strategy. But in the kind of terms of reference and so on, and the way that the Mayor has invited people to be part of it, he set it up as being very collaborative. You know, this is about him sending out, papers are published before the meeting, the board members get it, and the idea is they come back to the meeting to have sort of full and frank challenge of what's set out.
And it's general in nature, not site-specific. Is that fair, or does it do site-specific?
It's set up to be general in nature, but it would have the provision to be site-specific if there were, for instance, we wanted an agenda item on a few big NHS sites or whatever that we felt was appropriate to discuss, that could be done. But I think the idea is, because it is a meeting, a board that meets quarterly, it's more of a strategic overview. And I think the really important point that Simon touched on as well is this idea about having task and finish groups which kind of spawn off of the main board, because I think what the Mayor really was keen to avoid is to have a board that only met every quarter and sort of nothing happens in between that. So the idea with the 3 tasks and finishes which have been set up so far is that they're led by members of the board, or in one case a representative from, it's Councillor Peter John on behalf of London Councils, even though he's not a board member, but on behalf of London Councils. And the idea is that they then bring in a wider group from across the industry to have meetings in parallel with the board meetings, and then report back to the board. So the idea is the board kind of drives and generates work outside of the formal board meetings.
And presumably on the agenda is a progress report for what you've achieved since that in-between meetings.
Yes, exactly. So, I mean, both in terms of the task and finish groups, whereby they report back to the main board to update on their progress since the last board meeting, and also more broadly on, you know, whether it's, housing more generally, bringing forward public sector land, or whatever the board wants to have an update on, that's then reported back to the board.
Okay, that's one. So what else have you got, Simon? Is that the only one now? You mentioned earlier on bilateral meetings that take place in terms of relation to this. So are they ad hoc by nature, or are they much more part of the structure, part of the furniture of advising them?
They are becoming part of the structure effectively. So the Homes for London is the wider overall structure. I mentioned, as you said, the bilateral discussions. They're being more formalised in terms of frequency and then actually having tangible outcomes from progress on
and just to help the committee, those bilateral meetings might well be the NHS, Ministry of Defence. You mentioned.
Yeah.
They wouldn't necessarily. We wouldn't call those. Their meeting was with outside the GLA family, because you have presumably ongoing meetings with your colleagues in MOPAC and TFL.
Yeah, very much so.
Or are they part of the bilateral meetings? Are they? What's the structure for that? How do they work?
So we have regular meetings. Myself and my team have regular meetings with MOPAC and with LFIPA and with Transport for London. And as we've set out, since the Mayor last May, our working has been a lot closer, a lot more collaborative across the functional bodies. So there is a formalised structure there in terms of how frequently we meet and at what level we meet, and then there's regular meetings with James Murray in terms of Deputy Mayor input. And then the bilateral are the ones with the wider public sector landowners. And also I referenced the London Estates Board, which is a specific board that's been set up to look at the estates of the NHS within London.
Both those meetings, the bilateral ones, the internal GLA family ones, if I can describe it as such, they would be site-specific as well as general direction around realignment.
It's both, So it's the strategic bigger picture as well as drilling down into actual site opportunities.
Okay, at this point, Chair, I'm still wanting to continue and pursue some issues, but I think you want to come in on.
I just wanted to clarify this Homes for Londoners. Simon, you said it's the wider structure, but if I'm hearing what James and you are both saying, it's a committee. it's a board that pulls people together to advise you, and you're doing a few bits of work stream almost on the policy. Is that right? It's a committee.
I suppose in a way there's broadly speaking two different levels to it. So there is the board, as you say, a committee which kind of oversees it, and that's the kind of key political accountability where the mayor can take the strategic overview, get advised by all the other board members. More broadly speaking, one thing which we haven't really touched on yet, but it might be of interest to you, which has been reported publicly, but just to bring it up now, is the skills and capacity audit, which is being undertaken right across the GLA group about what capacity we have in terms of development, bringing forward opportunities for housing. And that's looking at what extra skills and capacity might we need within the broader kind of Homes for Londoners set of skills right across the GLA group. So we've got some skills within the Housing and Land Department here, we've got some at TfL, we've got others in different functional bodies and so on. And what skills and capacity do we have across the GLA family at the moment? And if we were going to say, right, that then constitutes the kind of the broader Homes for Londoners team who are actually doing the work, so rather than just the kind of strategic level, actually sitting down and working on a site-by-site basis and not just on GLA land, but also going out there and working with boroughs and private sector landowners to bring forward sites in different parts of the capital. What extra skills and capacity might we need to plug gaps which currently exist?
So we've got the committee, and then you're looking at staffing across the functional bodies that you will badge as Homes for Londoners staff who are going to then work to deliver your programme.
Exactly, yes. It's broader the Homes for Londoners team, and the reason why I'm using that language carefully is because we're not implying, we're not going into this with an idea of setting up a big third-party structure or so on. We're saying actually we have a lot of the skills and capacity already within the GLA family. We just need to make sure that within this kind of broader, should I call it a nexus of, a Homes for Londoners set of skills which go toward delivering what we want to deliver, do we have everything we need within the GLA family or not? And where we don't, where do we need to plug those gaps?
So Graham is part of your Homes for Londoners,
yes.
and Matthew is as well, part of Homes for Londoners. Okay, sorry, I just couldn't quite get my head around it, Lenz.
Okay, so we've established three mechanisms. Are there any more mechanisms of where you coordinate issues around land? Simon, I mean, where's the single property unit that was talked of? Is that now gone, or does that still, that unit, what's the role of that?
That effectively the former single property unit was from the previous mayor. Some of the work that was taking place within the single property units has all been folded into Homes for Londoners. So there is no single property unit any longer. That now comes under the wider remit of Homes for Londoners and the structure and the team as James has just outlined.
So the single property units remits then, I don't need to remind you what they are. They will still continue. I suppose for the sake of the record, we should identify opportunities for use of the GLA group's land and property to promote economic growth, job creation and new homes. It does seem to me, Homes for London, in driving their housing agenda, there are elements here of economic growth and job creation. I agree that job creation, where do they get picked up in terms of Homes for London debate? I think if I'm part of the housing movement, no disrespect to those present, hopefully they're part of the solution, not part of the problem in solving the housing crisis. So where do those discussions come from? Who's at the table keeping the issues of that? And further down, I think you had a current set of priorities. So who's, in terms of the Homes for London, you're having a debate about school provision in that. Where does that take place? One of the remits that was originally set up was the 10 free schools, and we've moved on after the budget with whatever the fashion and vogue of government is about schooling at the moment, about what they're providing. So where does that take place? Does that take place in Homes for London, or is that part of the internal GLA? I think for sake of clarity, see, this may be the first time that members have realised that there's no single property unit. And if we're just catching up on that, I'm not sure where the public will catch up if they ever follow the affairs of this great organisation in terms of who's taking what decisions. So we've now got that gone. So where does it take place?
Just before you answer, excuse me, the single property unit is still listed on the GLA website as though it still exists and still meets quarterly. Is that an oversight, or because, as Lena said, up until literally just now, we thought that was still functioning?
What I might do, I'll say one thing first, and never let Simon address the single property unit directly, particularly when he knew what happened before last minute.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you're absolutely right, Len, to identify the fact that when we're thinking about delivering housing, the kind of link between commercial space, job creation, broader infrastructure and so on is vital. And in actually making sure that those links happen, there isn't a kind of an easy way you can do it, but what you can do is set up the structures to make sure particularly different deputy mayors are constantly having those discussions. So we have various boards that meet just of deputy mayors and their advisors to make sure that we are addressing those issues as they relate to major development, so that it's not simply being taken on by housing or by transport or whatever, but we are actually linking up and teasing out any issues which arise on those. I know that's a kind of, there's not a kind of single answer to that question, because it does just take an issue of people constantly having those discussions about both the strategic approaches and the individual major sites which are coming forward. But I think having those structures set up where you're constantly talking, have those deliberative forums, I think is important, and I hope that that's been something which we've managed to set up under the new mayor.
What kind of structure?
Yeah, just in relation to the SPU and that was an oversight in terms of on the website. So broadly, it is fitting within Homes for Londoners, and this is about homes and jobs and growth for London. So, for example, there's a lot of work going on in relation to the Royal Docks, which will be yielding over 40,000 jobs over the next period. That fits within the London, the LEAP that's recently been established, and the overall governance for that is controlled through the LEAP. And that, as I said, that's a significant jobs growth area, wider regeneration project. And there are, within that overall area, there are significant sites coming forward for housing as well. So there is a cross...
Is the LEAP represented on the Homes for London board then?
The LEAP is, in terms of formally, no, it's not on the Homes for London board.
Okay. I think what we're trying to get at is who's doing the coordination. Look, if I can, just for the sake of it, because I think we just want to follow, much that we have new bits of the organisation established and new bits that go, what was achieved by the single property unit and what's still work in progress. So single properties remit, you had identify opportunities to the use of the GLA group land and property to promote economic job and creation. We presume that's with Homes for London now, and that's ongoing. Bring the GLA group own sites to market more quickly and reducing bureaucracy. How many times have Homes for London... It's interesting, your task and finish groups, because I would have thought that speed and implementation would have been a good task and finish group, and one of the first I'd want to establish for the GLA group. So what's been the discussion around the more quickly and reducing bureaucracy in GLA-owned sites? And for that, I think we can say GLA family. I think that's fair to say, because that's an issue for everyone, isn't it? TfL did some work on it, and I know the GLA of doing that. So has that work done now? You're all happy with the way that you do that? We don't need a further intrusive eye on the performance of speed and efficiency of disposals that you're doing within the GLA sites and bringing them to there. It's not an issue anymore.
I think it's an ongoing issue, essentially. The work that we're doing across, and as we demonstrated today, across the functional bodies is very much about identifying where those sites are. How can we work together more collaboratively? How can we speed up the decision making? How can we put in place the best tools that we've got within our overall capacity and capabilities across the functional bodies to do this? So one of the things, for example, is, as I've mentioned already, the London Development Panel. We're about to go to the market with the London Development Panel 2, tentatively titled, in the next couple of months to bring forward a framework panel for very much for public sector land owners to come forward with their land. And I know that, I'm sure Graham can touch on it and be more eloquent than me, but in terms of the property partnerships that has been established, that's very much about bringing land to the market in an appropriate manner and in a speedy and efficient way. Okay. But then it's not a one-off task and finish group that was set up to do that. It's a much long, it will be going across the piece in terms of making sure that we're not dropping any balls and making sure that the land is coming to the market in the opportune time.
Just so I can understand, you're saying that's mainstream, that's ongoing within the if I dare say in the positive sense, the office of bureaucracy, not in the critical sense of being bad about bureaucracies.
You mean using bureaucracy as a
It's
positive
important.
In a positive
Bureaucracy is
sense.
important.
I know the mayor
Yes.
doesn't, but I do. Right?
Yeah, I suppose
Is
if I
that
can
what
just-
it
if I
is?
can
Is it
just add to that.
mainstreamed?
I think that's right. I think it is mainstreamed, and this is just through the kind of the ongoing, either within GLA group family meetings or the bilaterals that Simon mentioned, and also just to flag up again the sort of skills and capacity audit work that's been done, which is ongoing to work out if we have the right skills and capacity across the group, what kind of structures we need to make sure that we're working more closely together and so on. That's really important too.
Okay. I mean, I'm getting a flavour that these mechanisms exist, albeit they're not as transparent as they may have been in a single property unit, but particularly about the collaboration and procurement efficiencies. Okay, I'd like to think we've got some successes here then. So have we now, have we published, and do we, forgive me for my ignorance if we don't, if it's so obvious, but it just seems that question to ask here at this stage. So have we published a list of all our assets held by the GLA group for the public and investors to develop? Is there one place that then develop can go to that's up to date and efficient that tells me these are the sites of the GLA family if I'm interested in?
There is the register of all of the public sector land owned within London under the London Land Commission register, and within that there is a subset of what is not operational, so what can come to the market. We've also got on the website the GLA family portal link through to exactly what those opportunities are in terms of the wider land within the GLA family. So there is.
One of the other priorities, sorry, I've got to say this, and it might sound sort of snidey, but well, it's meant to be really. Is it better than the up-to-date? Is it kept up-to-date and more up-to-date than the website issue about the single property unit? Who takes responsibility for these issues? I think they're small, but they do say something about the organisation. Who's got a grip of this? Is it you, or is it some marketing wing of this great organisation of us? What happens? Who commissions what? Do you have ownership over this?
In relation to the register, it's very much us, yes. In relation to the single property unit, then on the website, that is clearly an oversight, and I will make sure that that gets addressed.
Okay,
thanks for bringing it to my attention.
Okay, well, let's go back on. So I've got another 3 points here that I just want to get clear about what's been achieved or not achieved. Have we established a single cost-effective procurement process for all GLA group and other public landholdings to speed up the release of land and reduce bureaucracy?
That relates very much to the London Development Panel. That relates to the panel that was established, and now because it's a time-limited framework of 4 years,
okay.
So that expires later this year. So that's why we're now procuring a new age-compliant, efficient mechanism for public sector landowners across London to bring forward their land.
And actually, one of the things one of the things that I asked to be done and work with Simon and the team on is that we knew that the LDP, the London Development Panel we inherited, was coming to a close this year, and to look at learnings from that about how for the next panel we can improve it in various ways. So there's a few kind of ways that we've adjusted it slightly to make sure that it's it meets our expectations now.
Okay. I think we might need some more information around that, because it might be helpful, because that's one of the mechanisms that the coordination and getting the best out
Should we write to you after
the family.
with
it may well be at the end that we do that. This is where the housing agenda meets the land planning agenda or the asset planning agenda. So who's banging the drum for the identification? I won't mention free schools. I'll say for the schools. The 10 GLA group-owned sites suitable for schools. So who's banging the drum in Homes for London to get the 10 schools off the GLA sites? Or is that off the agenda now? I just want to be clear what the policy is or not. It must still be an aspiration that we put in infrastructure to some of these major sites. So who's looking out for that? Or does that get dropped because we don't have the single property unit anymore?
I mean, I suppose there is the bigger issue about the London plan review and looking at all the infrastructure needs of London more widely, which clearly housing takes a big part of, but it takes into consideration all the different infrastructure requirements of growth.
Well, it's just here, this was a remit of the property unit. I just want to understand who's picked it up or has it been dropped?
The London plan is slightly different because obviously that's a planning tool.
Yeah.
The single property unit was driving that on GLA-owned land.
Oh,
So
sorry,
for
you mean
example,
specifically on GLA land?
When
Sorry, I
Fire Brigade
misunderstood.
disposed of 10 stations, 4 of
10
them were turned
I
into
can't,
schools.
I
Yeah,
can't
that's
reel them
also
off
the
from the top
question.
of my head,
Yeah.
but that, because that, partly because that relates to the previous mayor, but those 10 opportunity land for those 10 schools, as we shall call them, was identified, and they are
So that's a
they're either
success.
I
complete
think
or
the
they're on
question
site.
Samuel Deval is asking is whether or not that remains a priority for this administration. Because you're right, it was identified under the previous administration, but is
Yeah.
it still a priority for this administration? And if so, who is driving that?
I mean, I suppose as a general question, we can take that up and I can get back to you. Just to if you want a particular answer about.
Whether or not identifying 10 sites for schools,
Yeah.
take Lynn's point about not calling them free schools at this point in time, is still a priority for this administration. And if it is, who is driving the land assembly for that? Is that a key priority for Homes for Londoners? Are you driving that? Is it elsewhere? From the slightly
Yeah. Well, if
used
I
expression, I'll
can.
suggest it's not top of your list. at the moment.
Well, I think it's probably best if I consult with my colleagues and get back to you in writing. If that's
I
all
think
right.
it's a very safe answer. That's fine. We'll write to you afterwards, Jane.
And then there was a final point, deliver budget savings and improve income generation through collaborative working and joint procurement. So in the space of a year, right, that this unit was established, is that unfair to say a year, how long it had been? It's been going for a bit more than a year.
I think it was
So,
established in 2013.
Can we then have a list of savings that were made on the back of this single property unit, even though it's now defunct, just out of interest, to see what savings were accrued?
Is it possible to do that in any
I would-
quantifiable way?
I will take that offline and see what we can. I mean, it was
Well, the reason-
it was reported against, but it was, as I said, it was in the old administration.
The reason why I say it, because of course there may be some questions asked of the new ways of working about efficiencies and savings accrued. Presumably, this is still an objective rolled over from the previous administration. As in, when you created Homes for London, someone would have looked at this and said, right, is this still important to us or not?
Okay, well, should we have a look into that? Yeah.
I think in terms of correspondence after meeting, a general catch-all about what property units functions have been folded into Homes for London
That's
would be
yeah.
pretty good, and also to get into a bit more of the detail in terms of measuring what was achieved under the single property unit and what you're hoping to build on, for want of a better word, with the Homes for Londoners programme. I think that would be quite useful.
Try and snatch that list from the website before it gets taken down then.
That would be a good start.
Very good. Shall we get out of the murky world of processes and procedures and get onto safer ground of strategies and alignment? And I think we heard earlier on that we're taking a very pragmatic approach to the needs of the different parts of the GLA family. But, you know, what's the areas that you want to make progress on still in terms of the alignment strategy? I'm a great believer in 1,000 flowers blooming. I'm not a great believer in people saying we're special and we need a different approach and escaping some accountability about that. So can we just talk about what's your ambition, I presume, or what you think you've achieved since Homes for London has been established around about aligning those strategies with the GLA family?
I might start on the same if you want to come in. I mean, to sort of build slightly on what we said earlier on, there is a very clear steer about the overall objectives, but the way that they play out in individual functional bodies is slightly tailored to their individual circumstances. So I suppose depending what terminology you use, single protocol might kind of cover slightly more subtlety underneath that, and you might have a single set of objectives you want to achieve, working with all the functional bodies, but there's slightly different ways that they play out in practice, bearing in mind the kind of legal, financial situation of the functional bodies and the structures that we've inherited with them. So what that does mean is that rather than sort of imposing a single protocol which might be ill suited to all of the different functional bodies, it does mean that we've been working very closely, as Rebecca said, with MOPAC and the Met, and as Graham said, with TfL, to come up with an appropriate strategy for each of the functional bodies and how to use their land to meet the kind of the various merit objectives. And so I think, you know, as we've sort of been touched on in the conversations we had earlier, TfL has a slightly more more latitude, and it can act as a commercial enterprise. So it can actually acquire land, assemble land, develop out, and so on. So it has quite a different role there legally in terms of what it can do. Whereas MOPAC and indeed FIPA is sort of slightly defined in terms of them being able to sell sites but not to acquire and develop themselves. So there's a sort of different way that we want to approach it for the different functional bodies. I think it's kind of important to recognise that there isn't that one-size-fits-all approach. So again, to have a single set of objectives, but then sort of tailored ways of implementing them seems to be the best way forward. And clearly, as well as the overall strategy, there's more kind of day-to-day working. So there's collaborating on, for instance, things around small sites, or sharing CPO expertise in land assembly, sharing strategies for how you bring things to market. What is the best way to bring small sites to market versus bigger sites? There's no point, MOPAC reinventing the wheel when we've done work at the GLA. So there's quite a lot of collaboration on stuff which is not so much about the overall overarching strategy, but just about the delivery on the front line.
Okay. And in terms of, so I think we've heard the pragmatic approach, allowing that to do, but the mechanisms to do that, they're always going to be the site-specific issues. I'm still unclear where they take place. Are they just in separate meetings that go on, or is there a formal mechanism for clearing out and bringing that? But is that at officer level in terms of your internal GLA meetings, in terms of trying to tease out, GLA wanting to be helpful, recognise that functional bodies have got to deliver, and they're in a slightly different sort of regime in some ways, in terms of maybe from the GLA Housing and Land Department. Where does that take place? And who, you are obviously a part of the political executive that does the arbitration, but where does the conversation, the negotiation, the understanding take place amongst officers before it gets to an executive decision, and the trade-offs that may take place?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So, it's very much about and one of the keywords for today is collaboration, so about the collaborative working across us as officers. Yeah. So, there's a broader understanding of what the land assets are held by the functional bodies. That's where you clearly start off from what can be coming forward over time in relation to their bespoke estate strategies, and then getting into the finer grain in relation to a high-level protocol, but then kind of underpinning that from a site-by-site analysis of how each site can come forward. And then that is reported back. So we get to a position as officers, and then a position is put to James and to the sort of the wider mayoral seniority in relation to making sure that the twin objectives, principally in terms of income realisation and affordable housing, is coming forward. And then that is endorsed or tailored at that level. So it's very much collaborative working at the officer level, understanding site-by-site specifics, and how those sites together in aggregation can come forward to meet the mayor's wider ambitions.
Just to illustrate that, I think collaborative working requires what we have, which is a combination of standing structures and then specific issue by issue working. So as James said, there are regular meetings of the deputy mayors, so they will know that those meetings are in the diary, so that if they have an issue that is relevant to a colleague's agenda, that can come into that structure. The advantage of a skills audit is we all know where the expertise is. So if you have a knotty site issue or policy issue, because combining different public policy objectives is, by definition, multifaceted, you have different colleagues that you can approach in an ad hoc meeting or a phone call around a specific site or in a standing structure of meetings. So it's from where I sit, it feels effective. It feels that we have access to professional support from colleagues in the different functional bodies, and we can come together on specific issues or in standing structures as need be to take forward our individual and collective objectives.
On that, can you give a concrete example of where collaboration between the GLA family groups has delivered something?
Yeah, so as I said, where we are now, we are actually, with MOPAC, we're actually in a phase of concluding our consultation on the police and crime plan. So, and looking at the needs of the estate to meet the strategic objectives of the police and crime plan and to keep reducing back office costs. So there are phases in policy cycles where you have a lot of sales and decisions, and phases where you actually consult and say what are our strategic objectives, where you have a slowing down as you do your consultation on the police and crime plan. So that is why you will see that there's been different pipelines of progress, different
that's
speeds.
pipelines
But,
rather than...
but in terms of when you look at MOPAC specific sites, we're having quite constructive discussions about how to bring in and push out the envelope on affordable housing whilst being efficient and effective to the police service across small sites and larger sites, and what are the commercial opportunities there. Okay. And in those discussions, some of which need to be confidential because they're commercially sensitive, it is very effective that myself and Matthew can draw in on the expertise of GLA and of TfL colleagues.
Okay. I don't object to anything you said, but I asked for a concrete example of something you'd actually achieved.
So
which is not me being cynical about it. Can you give us an example where you've done that? And
commercial approaches to sites that have not yet been brought to market, so therefore, by definition, there's a limit to what I can say without revealing commercially sensitive information, but I can assure you that in our pipeline of sales... Are there any sites that have been developed as a result of that? What? I don't object to anything you said, but are there sites that have been delivered through the collaborative working that you're talking about? Maybe Matthew...
Could I give an example? Yeah. I mean... So the current position at the moment is obviously developing the strategy and bringing sites to become surplus, and we'll talk about our estate in a moment. But I think a very good example where we've worked with land and housing previously is on the Hendon site. Hendon was 55 acres, which we brought to the market together through the London Development Panel. Achieved 30 to 40% more than expected and delivered it probably 6 months quicker as a combined entity between land and housing and ourselves. And that's the sort of areas which I think we would anticipate moving forwards on those particular sites. So I think, although not within the current administration, I think that's a good example of how we work together.
Okay, so it would be building on pre-existing practices, which is fine. I saw some of them in printers on. Sorry, was it? Send them a pigeon on that point?
Yeah, what I just don't understand is, if actually the bulk of the expertise, quite frankly, is at TfL, why isn't TfL running yours and Elfipa's property services to make sure that you deliver and that we can push? All I'm hearing is collaboration and all this sort of softly, lovely words, which to me say you're not going to deliver. And you've heard, we know the pressing needs that. Why aren't you getting TfL to take over? And is this something perhaps James, you as Deputy Mayor, have looked at? They've got the expertise, they're proving they can deliver. Why aren't they dealing with the property that's surplus at the police and fire authorities?
Can I answer that one as well?
Yes.
Yeah, please do. Sorry, I'm just frustrated.
So our estates are very different. As we've said, and Craig said, that we are very different estates. They're a development company, we're not. And you would say, logically, therefore, why wouldn't we put our sites through the TfL approach? The reality is our estate is very, very different in terms of the skill sets that sits within TfL. We have 90% of our estate is going to be buildings which are 50 units or less potential development, an average of around 23 across the development. In the last 3 years, we have vacated about 140 buildings. Now, when we vacate a building, the real challenge for us is making sure we deliver operationally what we have to deliver. It's not actually developing out the site. Of the 73 sites we've sold freehold, 11 have been retained for existing use, leaving 62, and 95% have achieved planning permission since 2013. So we're actually, all our sites are building out very quickly, but we have a different approach because we don't retain an interest in the land because it's so small. About 45% of our land has been sold to SMEs. And again, that's a different approach to the large swathes of land that happen. So I think although it would appear logical, Caroline, what you've said, the reality is not the same. We are actually delivering it out in a very fast and efficient way.
But that begs the question of what's a fast and efficient way, and what's the checks and balances. How do we measure that you're in the thousand flowers blooming, that you're delivering to your bespoke type situation you're in? And I think that's the checks and balances. I don't see, I mean, Homes for London, partly is interested in the units you're producing or whatever you're selling it onto, but there's another side to this discussion, which was originally about the use of the GLA assets, which was about value for money. Now, I think that's you, Simon, with your wider issues. We have a very narrow focus about housing and land issues, about producing housing, which is an important objective for this mayor, and as has been for previous mayors. But there's an issue about use of assets in the GLA family. How do we hold MOPAC MPS to account to know that they're doing a good job within 1,000 flowers blooming, which isn't the same as the work that you do or TfL do? And we'll come on to TfL in a minute, because there's a set of questions around there.
Going forward, in terms of the Homes for Londoners, the board set up, that there will be reporting on the overall functional bodies' outputs in relation to their land and what's coming forward on it. I mean, I would just, in relation to Caroline's earlier question, in terms of the GLA ourselves, you know, we've got a substantial amount of land that the GLA owns that we have brought forward to the market over the last 4 years since the previous mayor inherited it in 2012. You know, we've got over 50,000 homes coming forward. We've got over 60,000 jobs being created on that land. So we've got ourselves within the GLA particular expertise in bringing forward and accelerating.
And I think that's very important what you've said. But for me, and the way you've described ours at their measurements will be about the units. I'm talking about, actually, have I got a decent amount of cash for the various projects that are going on in the GLA family? If I'm putting a subsidy, is it good value for money in terms of my return? It's the pound, shilling and pence bit that I need to make sure, where is that taking place? Because the measure of success for me is dual. It's the number of units that I might be pursuing in terms of my housing policy, but it's also about the value for money, and am I getting the best price both for TfL or for MOPAC or in GLA? And, you know, how do I check on that? How does not me personally, but I want to know that the executive is asking those very questions and can stand before people to say, actually, this is very good value for money, this is a good deal for Londoners. I don't see where that's happening at the moment.
Do you want to start with that first, James, and then I'll come to
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's one actually where I know Graham and Rebecca want to come in more specifically about the assets, because I think, you know, there is a question. Clearly, I'm going to be pushing for housing, but I'm also going to be cognizant of the other priorities that exist there. I mean, there are other accountability structures, like within TfL, there is its own set of accountability structures. So maybe if I hand over to you guys, if you want to comment.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, I think from a TfL point of view, in essence, there are two main reporting routes that I would go up to in terms of this activity. One is indeed the Homes for Londoners board and the business plan and the reporting that underpins that. In parallel, you've got TfL's finance committee and board structure. So the same information will go up through both of those routes in order to make sure that, you know, myself and TfL more broadly are on target in terms of the objectives that have been set. On a site-by-site basis, and indeed more broadly in terms of the programme, we within TfL also have the Commercial Development Advisory Group, so that's chaired by Francis Solway, ex-Chief Exec of Britain's biggest property company. So Francis and the team do check every major transaction that we're going through in order to make sure that they are comfortable, and that's an independent advisory group, and that's not just a gate process. They are involved from the outset in terms of the strategy that we come up with on a site-by-site basis. It's also worth saying that with people within my team will meet with the land and property team literally on a weekly basis in terms of working through the detail of each site. We've made fantastic progress over the course of these last 9 months. We're talking about almost 1,000 units that we brought to market, hitting over 50% affordable housing and exceeding the targets that were set in the business plan. We could not have done that by ourselves. We've only been able to achieve that by working closely with James and Simon and the teams at the GLA. And that's, you know, so I see James and Simon on a monthly basis, but we now have literally on a weekly basis or more conversations going on, both on a site-by-site basis, but also, you know, it's not just about how do we get through the sites for this year. There's an enormous amount of work that's already gone on, because next year we want to move from 1,000 sites being brought to market to 3,000 sites being brought to market. So we're talking about a, you know, threefold increase in the number of units that we're looking to bring to market over the course of the next 12 months. And whatever we have within TfL, we don't have the leverage, the powers, the expertise in order to take forward all of those sites. And I'll give, I guess, one specific example. You know, the team that we've assembled, and we have done so over, you know, the last 18 months. We've got, you know, fantastic people, the like of which TfL has never employed before, from commercial property companies and advisors, and that's fantastic. But when it comes to, for example, small sites, our approach on small sites is that we'll be putting our small sites into a process that's run by Simon and the GLA. They've got the expertise in that, and in terms of bringing forward sites with SMEs and community land trusts. Why would we build up a separate function within TfL in order to manage that, when we can pass our sites over to a team who could coordinate that, not just from a GLA point of view, but that, you know, that skill set, that expertise can be applied within the GLA family, but also hopefully increasingly across public sector land. And I think, sorry, the last thing we'll say, it's the pragmatic view that saying, well, TfL's got, you know, the largest compulsory purchase function, you know, in the country. We therefore do the activity for the GLA, whether it's for the Olympic Games or anything else. It's about that pragmatic view that saying, actually, where is the core expertise, where therefore logically do those things best sit? I don't think there's one answer. I don't think the answer is a single creation of a function, because ultimately you're talking about a complex mix of sites and different individual objectives that organisations will have. So I don't think there's one answer, but the answer is to make sure, and I think that this is what has been successful, an increasingly coordinated approach that says, where do those functions best sit?
I don't think anyone's arguing for a single thing. I think it's the robustness of the collaboration and the outcomes of, but the outcomes being different from what we would usually expect. Do you know what I mean? In terms of in the widest possible outcomes.
Absolutely.
So I think that's where we're heading to it. And I think you raise a very important issue about the policy contradictions that comes across. So in TfL, you bring together your small parcels of land, offer to the GLA, you may look at it individually, or, because we're a large organisation, we may look at packages. The frameworks that both TfL and GLA are working in, you've both got a select list of developers, and no doubt you're going to establish a new select list of small, medium-sized companies that might be interested in tendering for some of those sites. In giving that to the GLA, and of course the GLA's mission is, as James says, I'm here to produce more housing for London. At some stage, there's a trade-off between you and TfL, which still needs revenue, right? And maybe part of the trade-off is you saying, I'll take less of a hit of some of the, in terms of the different sections of housing, because I want some money. I need some money in my bank. I need some money in my bank rather than through other issues. Where is that resolved? And how, in commissioning or giving across to the GLA role, where are those issues resolved?
Those issues would be resolved at
between myself, James, Val Shawcross, then up through to Homes for Londoners and the board. But in practice, it comes back to probably the first point that James said. In order for TfL to deliver its targets, we need to take a portfolio-wide approach. At some sites, we need to focus on revenue generation. in some sites we need to focus on delivering high levels of affordable housing. Not to the exclusion of each other. On any site you've got to get the appropriate mix. But, you know, in order to get to where we need to get to, we need to bring forward lots of sites, including small sites. Small sites are important in terms of space. Small sites are important in terms of unlocking a part of the market that otherwise wouldn't be reached by our major development sites. We are in discussion as to how that's launched, which particular sites are brought forward. But it's not the case of we lose interest in and we simply pass those sites over. Of course we're still part of the process, but we're part of a process that's run from the GLA because that's what makes most sense in terms of where those core skills best sit. And clearly we want to make sure that, because ultimately we're still accountable for the homes that are built, the percentage of affordable homes that are built and the revenue that comes from those small sites. This is just me being entirely practical and pragmatic to say the best place for me to deliver on those small sites is to do so through Simon and his team.
Right, we talked about the risks of the strategy. We take it that both Rebecca, Graham, Matthew, you're on board with the approach that's been outlined, James, which seems sensible and will take us forward in the future. In terms of the risk, we've talked about, I've raised the issues of value for money, you've come back. I think we need to follow up, Chair, on some more issues of the wider value for money issues. And, you know, things like how do we refresh your select list of the great and good in terms of your development partners? How do we make sure that we're getting the benefits of that rather than maybe the disbenefits of that process as well? But I just want to, how do you, clearly in your strategies in this area about, downturns in markets and about when you release and when don't you release. And of course the pressure on TfL to release and to grow that part of the business from the 1,000 to 3,000 disposals or sort of issues. What's the strategies of both MOPAC and TfL, and including GLA Land, of thinking that how do we stop the roller coaster, or can we stop the roller coaster if there's a downturn and we are in great need, I presume, or if we can get the MPS to spend some of the money, its capital money, but no doubt we're in, what's the pressures on us to ride out a downturn and to make sure that we don't sell our assets on the tree.
Okay, I think we've got two distinct questions there, if I may reinterpret that. One is about the list, I think, of the 25 developers on the London Development Panel, and whether that's up for refreshing and how you do it. The second one is when you decide on timing about releasing of property disposal. I think the first one's probably best aimed at you, James, and the second one at colleagues in their place at TfL.
So I think just to separate out, there's kind of, in my mind, there's kind of three different pots that we're kind of talking about. I mean, one is the property partnerships framework which TfL set up, and that came in sort of February last year, so it's about a year old. So, and that's something where we came in, it was up and running, and we wanted to get sites out as quickly as possible. So worked with the property partnership framework to get them out to market through joint ventures and so on. Secondly, there's the London Development Panel, which I think is the sort of main focus of the question, which we inherited but runs out this year. And as I said, one of the things that I asked to be done is to speak to people on the panel, speak to public sector landowners, work out what do they like about it, what do they dislike about it, and work out how we then sort of recalibrate it for London Development Panel 2, which is going out, I think, for tender at the end of this month. So that's in progress now. So that will be up and running later in the year to take over when the current one passes expiry. I think the third bit, which is just worth flagging up because it's come up a couple of times in comments other people have made, is about small sites, where actually we did look at, with the LDP2, with the successor to the London Development Panel, about how to make sure that SMEs were represented in that. But actually, sometimes having SMEs on the London-wide panel can put them off, because they don't want to apply for all across London. They're just a local company who might operate in the local area. So actually, we decided there might be other ways of offering sites to SMEs and indeed CLTs or other smaller scale developers, and that's a sort of separate piece of work we're looking at, which is not going through, clearly not the property partnerships frameworks. That's much bigger scale sites. we decided not to go down the London Development Panel 2 route because of the reasons I just outlined. But we want to make sure there's a kind of bespoke way of offering the small sites from TfL and indeed other functional bodies to market in a way that's attractive for local SMEs.
On that, so you've got two processes, one for larger organisations and the invitation to tender's gone out. Is that correct?
It goes out later this month?
It's scheduled to go out later this month,
Okay.
end of this month.
I'm assuming that that's not a commercially confidential document in terms of the parameters within that. Is that correct?
Well, there'll be at the end of the month it will be the OG notice, so that will be public, and that will have the criteria.
Okay, I think it'd be useful for us to get hold of that when we. And the second one is about SMEs, and I was saying in the pre-meeting that I've been on the other end of bidding for public sector procurement contracts, and for SMEs they can be very, very off-putting because the amount of paperwork is about this thick. And if you don't get through the process at the end where you don't get work from it, it's a complete waste of time. How advanced are you in putting together what will be the invitation to tender to them?
Well, I think I suppose what it might be is it might be doing something different than getting SMEs onto a panel. Because I think in some ways the actual whole process of getting on a panel can put people off.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
as you say, you have
I
to go,
entirely agree with you.
Yeah.
What I'm really trying to get to is how advanced your thinking is and in which direction it's going.
Sure, there's a lot of work going on at the moment, and we're sort of making sure it's legally robust and set up in the right way, but looking about a different structure for bringing small sites to market, and we can update you in due course about
That's
that.
fine. So it's in preliminary stages, not yet ready for public consumption.
Fair to say, I think, yeah.
Okay, that's fine.
And so last in terms of questions, I want to go back to some of the issues and the barriers and the speeding up of the process. And clearly there is some work going on. And again, we might need to ask for further clarity about the different works of speeding up the processes around your area of work. But going back to one of the issues for Homes of London, in the process of, shouldn't there be a task and finish work around the planning process in London? Because everyone tells me that whether you want to maximise the money, whether MOPAC enters into going through a planning process to maximise the amount of money for the sale, or whether you leave it to developers to do, but isn't one of the barriers for the old process is around planning in London? And is that one of
planning in general?
In general,
yeah.
If we wanted to do our own planning on our own land and try and maximise values or not on some of that small scale land, it might well be interesting to do.
So I mean, I think we could probably have our a scrutiny entirely about the planning process and then some. I mean, just yes.
The reason why I say this structure is I'm trying to get my head around Homes for London and what it's really trying to achieve around that, and is that on its agenda? That's what I need to know.
Yeah,
and
I mean,
isn't that the be all and end all?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a sort of separate piece of work being done about improving the planning system. I think the first sort of health warning I put on it is that actually getting planning permission is not necessarily what holds up development, because if you look, there is a lot of planning permissions in the system, they're not being built out. So what we need to do is make sure the planning permissions get implemented and built out and so on. So it's as much about the actual, the delivery and so on, and actually getting them implemented as it is about getting planning permissions. That notwithstanding, there are clearly issues raised with me by people who are putting planning applications, saying that it can take quite a long time in certain circumstances. And some of that is down to resources that local boroughs have when they're struggling to fund planning departments. And that's why some of the stuff in the Housing White Paper, which reflects conversations we've been having with government over the last few months, about saying there can be flexibility about what local planning authorities can charge, so they can charge slightly higher fees if that goes into accelerated granting of planning permission, is something which we've discussed with government, and it's something that when I've spoken to the industry about it, you actually get agreement from all sides. So the councils are saying, yes, if you can give us a bit more money, we can accelerate it. But the applicants are also saying we'd happily pay a bit more money if we could get a guaranteed quicker permission. So I think there is room there to accelerate the planning permissions.
There is a role for the mayor as well, though, isn't there? Because there's an 8 and 13-week planning target that is imposed by the government, so 8 weeks for small applications and 13 for larger ones. The mayor has the power to intervene and determine planning applications if the local government is not determining them, doesn't he?
He does, and in fact he's going to determine his first 2 planning applications this Friday.
Really?
They're stage 3 hearings are this Friday, the first 2 that he's called in. I mean, I'm veering. Tell me to shut up if I'm talking too much about planning at the wrong committee. But I'll just very briefly say that I think in terms of in terms of taking over and calling in planning applications, there's clearly a limit to the resources there are here to take over planning applications. And actually, if you're taking over a lot of planning applications, you're failing. You don't want to be taking over a large number. You want to be taking over key ones where something has gone wrong, or key ones where you think a different decision should have been arrived at, or whatever, and to be consistent about that so that it extends your authority beyond only those which you take over.
That's not an unfair point.
If I may
We
say
need,
very
just 1 second, Greg. Members, we are going to have to start making some progress because we are getting a bit bogged down. I'm going to take Rebecca. Are you finished in your section? Then I'm going to move to a question from Caroline. Sorry, so I'm going to pitch in, and then it's going to be a 7-minute side, Rebecca.
Just a brief word on where the scrutiny of value for money comes from our side. Of course, a big picture value for money is how the Met uses its revenue and capital to achieve maximum operational impact and meet the strategic priorities of policing, and that's where MOPAC oversees the Met and yourselves oversee the overall Met budget, where there's a trade-off between capital spent, particularly on estate versus digital. And as Matthew said, we hold at the moment very few surplus buildings. We only have four at the moment. Then there's a separate value for money question of if you have surplus.
Could I ask you to pause slightly? Because we are going to come into that in some detail in the next section.
Okay.
So you'll get another bite of the cherry there.
I just wanted to pick up earlier, we were talking about small sites, and that's why, Matthew said, that's why MOPAC is so different. All your sites are so small, 23 units, whatever. Well, Graham then says from TfL, well, actually, our small sites, we pass to the GLA. So does MOPAC pass its small sites to the GLA, and why doesn't the GLA just manage all of MOPAC's sites? We're into shared services. Would that not make sense?
I'll hand over to Matthew there.
I'm not sure I can answer the specifics of what TfL do with their small sites, but from our perspective, we have 2 key advisors. So before we go into see MOPAC, we have all our properties valued, which go through Cushman & Wakefield as our independent valuers. And then we have Knight Frank, who sit behind us and put on the market all our smaller sites. I think in 2014, we sold 1 building on average every 2 weeks. Which sort of ran through the whole of the year, so with about 25 buildings in the year. We put all our buildings, because they're fairly straightforward, and I think that's the important thing. We don't have complexity in terms of having to have operational land like a tube station under a building or beside a building or track or anything like that. They're totally independent and go straight into the open market. And as a result, they run, as soon as they're surplus, literally, within weeks of them being surplus, we've usually exchanged or completed at that point. I think NSY was obviously our biggest, New Scotland Yard was our biggest, and we handed the keys over 2 hours after we left the building. So that is our absolute ambition, is to hand the buildings over as soon as we leave the buildings, straight to the purchaser. And as I said earlier, we've had on average about 14 months before that purchaser has got planning permission on that particular site across all our sites. So from a perspective, our sites are terribly straightforward in one sense. It's very much more complex getting our people out of our sites because of the nature of the technology that sits within them. We have quite a lot of secret systems that sit around our buildings. So that's more of the challenge that we have, not so much getting rid of the sites.
Assembly members decide.
Thank you, Chair. This is really a couple of questions to you, James and Simon. In terms of disposals, what do you see as the responsibility of the functional bodies? Is it to get best consideration or help deliver the main strategic priorities? Can you see any changes in light of the thinking, the DCLG's housing white paper, that rules for getting best consideration could be relaxed?
Sure. I think clearly in terms of the role that we play, there's a question between balancing the income that's generated from sites if they're disposed of or developed and the housing and the affordable housing. And I think this kind of comes to a very key kind of topic that we've been discussing today, which is around what expertise and flexibility the GLA can offer when working with TfL and indeed with MOPAC about their overall portfolio. So whether we can look at a portfolio wide approach to affordable housing, making sure that we're building more affordable housing on some sites, maximising values on others to achieve an overall best outcome across the portfolio, and then working with other partners like housing associations or whoever to develop out individual sites to maximise affordable housing where possible. So I think the answer really to that is that it's about us. I know it sounds a bit like a broken record to come back to the collaboration point, but it's about us sitting down with the functional bodies, seeing their pipeline of sites coming in, and rather than just having one single response to every single site, saying you must get X affordable on that site and just put it out to market and forget about it. We say, okay, well, what about if you flex it a bit on that one, but we'll push it up on some other sites, we'll bring them out in this order, and we'll develop that one in that way and dispose of that one in that way, and so on. By having that slightly more tailored and subtle approach, we can actually achieve both objectives of increasing housing and affordable housing and increasing revenue.
Yeah, I mean, and just to add to that, it is very much about the twin objectives that need to be met. The obligation, if you like, to achieve the best consideration and to maximise the income from the assets and the affordable housing. And we're alive to how that has to come forward, and it is a very nuanced approach on each individual site to get the best out of that individual site to make sure that both of those objectives are being met.
Okay. We're going to move on to Assemblymember Prince, and then we're going to move on to...
So I can't cover this quickly with an old chestnut, but can you tell me, James, does the Mayor still have an aspirational target of 50% affordable?
50% is his long-term strategic target, yeah.
Can you tell me how he's going to deliver that? Or you are going to deliver that, I guess, as he's
Sure. Yeah. So in terms of increasing affordable housing through the in housing delivery, you've got the planning system, whereby you can expect a higher level of affordable housing to be delivered without public subsidy. So just through the planning system, a straightforward planning game. You've then also got the Affordable Housing Investment Programme, which the Mayor has agreed with government, which is the £3.15 billion for 90,000 starts by 2021. That's currently open for bids from housing associations at the moment for them to put in their bids for their programmes. And in their programmes, they'd be expected to deliver at least 50% and sometimes 60% affordable housing across their programmes. And then it's clearly the role that public land, including GLA group land, plays. TfL land, for instance, delivering over the last 4 sites an average of 50%. So there's a combination of the straightforward planning game, which doesn't involve public investment. That's just the planning rules that you set, and you set clear and consistent planning rules. There's then the investment and the land.
On the private land, whatever you want to call it, isn't the guidance in the supplementary planning guidance, isn't the target around 35%? Isn't the benchmark 35% on that?
So in the supplementary planning guidance, it sets out 2 different routes to achieving planning permission. The first one is to go through a viability assessment, which is what we might call the more classic role that we've gotten used to in terms of through Dragons, yeah. So that, but we set out a more clear and consistent expectation of how viability assessments should be conducted to maximise affordable housing and give certainty up front. The other route is route B, is a threshold approach where we say if a development can get to a minimum threshold of 35% without public subsidy, then it has an accelerated track through the planning system. It's quite clear in the planning guidance that once you get to 35% minimum threshold without subsidy, you can then look to invest from the funding programme as well, getting it up into the 40s, above 40%, and up towards the strategic target of 50.
I get all that, but every number you've given me is 50% or less. I believe Graham was saying he's going to hit bang on 50%, which is great news. Simon's probably going to hit 50%, thereabout. The private sector target really is 35%. Now, I know there's lies and statistics, but in order to get to 50%, if you've got something that's performing at 35% and the other 2 things are performing at 50%, whichever way you get there, you won't get to 50%, will you? There'll be a short point. I want to know where that extra 15% is coming from, because in reality, if you accept that the private sector can't deliver 50%, then surely you should be pressing Graham and Simon, not so much Rebecca, but those 2 to be delivering 60 or 65% to make up that gap, and they're not. So how do you get to 50%?
So I think an important part in this is to look at the funding programme, so the £3.15 billion into the partnerships with housing associations, where there's an expectation there that everyone who signs up to that delivers at least 50% across their programme, and in some cases 60% or more across their programmes. And housing associations are substantial deliverers of homes in London. You know, they deliver a large volume of the homes in London. So if you have that, all of the partners through the funding programme delivering 50 or 60% upwards affordable housing, and then you have developers or private-led schemes which deliver a minimum threshold of 35% or a minimum threshold of 40% where public subsidy is involved, you do tend towards our long-term strategic target.
So are you saying then that you'll be pressing these organisations for the 60% rather than the 50%?
Sorry, I was talking there about specifically the strategic partners through the funding programme.
Yeah, I get that. And are you really saying that the government has got the mayor out of jail on this by providing those £3+ billion worth of investment?
I think that the deal that we came to with government was the product of really good collaboration between us and Whitehall in terms of our shared objectives of building more new and affordable homes to rent and buy. And I think it represents a real vote of confidence in what we can do in London.
Without the government's intervention, the mayor would not be able to deliver his 50%.
I think that as everyone knows, when you're delivering affordable housing, it's a combination of planning and investment.
Okay. Just for clarity, before we move on, because we are going to have to make some progress, members. I think what Assembly Member Prince is teasing out is the fact that with the supplementary planning guidance indicating 35% subject to viability testing on private land, in order to hit 50% overall, you'll have to over-deliver on public land. And I think what he's asking you is, are you pressing the GLA family group to be delivering more than 50% housing on developments that come forward in order to get the aggregate of 50% across the board?
I think in terms of over-delivering, it's not just on public land, it's also on the sites which are developed by those strategic partners through the funding programme. So in the funding prospectus, it sets out that if you want to be a strategic partner, i.e. a big partner in the funding programme, you're expected to deliver over 50, or in some cases over 60% affordable housing across your portfolio. So it's not just on the public land, because public land is really important, but in terms of actual numbers, there's many more sites come through private hands. So we really need to focus on driving up the affordable housing there, rather than expecting the public land to take up the slack. Because even if the public land is very, very high, it's not the majority of the sites which we're delivering.
So the answer then is that it's public land plus strategic partners on the private land will compensate for other private land falling below 50%.
As I say, it's all the things pulling in the same direction. So it's the land, it's the planning, and it's the investment, and they work in concert. And I think it's important. What we've tried to do in terms of the supplementary guidance and its link with the funding prospectus is make sure that they work in an integrated way, which they arguably haven't done so far. Where you have an expectation of what affordable housing contribution as a minimum should be made just through the planning system, so without any public subsidy going in, to make sure that it's not just cannibalising, you're putting public subsidy in to stuff you could have gotten through the planning system anyway, and then using the investment to have additional affordable housing, where we've got this 90,000 target, of which 2/3 are for first-time buyers.
Okay, that's going to be a watch this space development.
Can I just ask one very quick question?
Actually, Assemblyman Prince, it's 20 to 12. We've got halfway through these sections. If it's a yes or no answer, you can ask the question.
With the government investment, James,
Pressure.
will you now achieve the 50%?
50% is a long-term strategic target.
Okay,
That's quite a yes or no answer. Right, okay. We're moving on now to do a bit of a deeper dive on the Met, and Assemblymember Prince is leading on that.
Thank you. Some of these questions have actually already been alluded to or possibly even answered, but just for clarity, I'll ask them, but Rebecca, please don't feel the need to give a long answer if you think you've already done that. And also, Matthew, you'll be earning your crust now. Thanks for waiting there patiently, I do appreciate that. Okay, so first of all, can you explain, either Rebecca or Matthew, only one of you need to answer that, what are the Met Police Service's priorities for the use of surplus land?
Matthew, I think I'll pass to you for that.
So I think the first thing is identifying surplus. I think Rebecca's mentioned we only have 4 buildings which are surplus at the moment, so we intend to have those on the market in the next few weeks. And we have 2 areas of land one hectare piece of land that sits at Hendon still, which has been identified as potentially for higher affordable housing. We'll come on to in a moment. Another one at 25 Deer Park Road, which is a storage unit. The current position we're in is that we are developing our strategy as part of the police and crime plan. So everything I'm about to talk about has yet to be approved by MOPAC. But as you can imagine, as you develop a plan, you come out with a hypothesis of what the estates might look like. We are in the process of looking at or radically changing the technology that sits underneath our organisation. We've just invested £150 million of some of the capital that's been raised through our property sales into mobile technology. And that will enable us to reduce the amount of space that we have. We currently have about 37,000 desks in our estate. We will be reducing that down to about 19,000 desks. So it's quite a radical shift in the way that we're all going to be working within the Met, both from a staff perspective and from an officer perspective. So with that in mind, our estate currently has about 369 buildings within it. It's 363 buildings, forgive me, and about 100 partner buildings. Those are buildings which we sit within a local authority building or another government building where we are working collaboratively to deliver a certain output. So with that in mind, we are hoping to reduce our estate from that 363 down to closer to 100 buildings, which is quite a radical shift. Of that 250 buildings that we'll be coming out of, about 75 are freehold. So there's quite a big slug of leasehold buildings in there that will just be terminating the lease. The 75 buildings, and this is where, Caroline, we talked about the size of the estate, about 10 are very small. I.e. they're single units or will have less than 10 units. About 60 have an average of about 23, I mentioned earlier, and an average sale of £3.5 million. And then we have about 5 larger sites. Our key focus is to maximise our capital receipts from those, but bearing in mind, we do need to deliver to wider mayoral priorities as we go forwards. Early estimates show that the capacity of the sites could deliver about 1,900 units, both affordable and private for sale, or private for rent. And we'll be discussing this target, or are discussing this target, with Simon and James as we speak at the moment. We're looking at a portfolio approach, exactly the same protocol as Graham's just worked through in terms of his estate, in terms of delivering affordable across the estate. So we will be identifying 2 sites where we have got a much higher percentage of affordable than the remaining sites, so that we can effectively top up to enable that 50% target to be met. I think that's really that sort of focus our questions. Is there any other questions that goes around that?
Well, that has covered about 4 of my questions, actually. So I'm grateful to you, Matthew. And it was done very, very concisely as well, so I'm grateful for that, really. Could you tell me a bit about the management team that works on the surplus land? How big is that team, please?
So we work on an outsourced model, but don't forget our surplus estate comes in small batches because we use our estate and vacate it over a period. So the 75 buildings we're looking at will be vacated over the next 3.5 years. So they come in those small batches. We have a team of 1 dedicated person within my team. I have 20 to 30 dedicated people on actually trying to exit buildings. So that's the most important part. And I think I mentioned earlier, our challenge is actually getting out of buildings, not actually trying to get them into the market. That 1 disposals person then has the support of Knight Frank, and we pull in as much as we need at any time to exit our estate. And I think the key for us, and I mentioned earlier, but I'd like to re-emphasise, is there is nothing worse than having a police building, which everyone recognises as a police building, that we move out of and then suddenly sits there and boarded up for absolutely ever. neither providing housing nor actually providing policing either. So our absolute ambition is to have as few of those as possible and actually be getting out within weeks or months, or actually having them disposed within weeks, months of that moment.
Great, thank you. Can you tell me, you've sort of explained what you've done with the receipts so far, but what are your future plans for the receipts as it's a capital receipt?
So it's ongoing. So far we've raised £940 million of capital receipts, and that's been invested back both into the estate and we talked about into technology. We have a further target of around £300 million to achieve. Clearly the market is moving, so we have to be careful on that one. But we've taken that in terms of into our stride, as it were, in terms of our risks. The major bulk of that money will be being reinvested into the estate. So we actually managed to retain the value of our estate, even though we actually sell quite large chunks of it. So overall, we maintain the value of our estate on our balance sheet.
Thank you. Could you tell me, at the moment, how many senior officers have residence in property owned by the MPS? Do we know?
Off the top of my head, I don't know that answer. I know there has been specific questions asked under both freedom of information and recent questions. I don't have them in front of me to have them in the top of my head, so I'm certainly I'd be happy to answer those questions after the meeting.
Okay, so if I just give you a couple more questions around that. Do we rent any of those properties out to other bodies? And if we do, who might those bodies be? Perhaps you could.
We do. I can tell you now. We have 88 single houses and 2 section houses provided 405 rooms. The section houses, just to go on that one, it's just the rooms. We are one of them is actually surplus to requirements. Of the single houses, the bulk are let through to our own offices, but there are a number of wider security agencies who let space from us in that area as well.
Okay, so you might not be able to give me the detail of that, actually.
I can't, I'm afraid.
You'd have to kill me. What level of rent is charged? Is it market rent or is it subsidised rent?
Again, can I come back to you on that question? There's clearly defined rents that are charged through to our officers, and that's part of the agreement. And secondly, we then rent through to the third parties, but I'd need to just confirm that back to you.
Okay, thank you. And the last question, I think I know the answer actually, but I'd just like to explore it a little bit, is around the fact that clearly the strategy at the moment is to sell the surplus properties. The GLA and more important, the Transport for London are now looking at a different approach, which is to use land and properties to generate income, which I think is very sensible. And of course that you have more control over the affordable aspect of that as well, which is actually to be welcome. I understand that you probably aren't able to do that, but would it be worth James and Rebecca, Matthew, exploring how either by approaching the government or by a way of transferring the land to one of our other partners, you could look at that in more depth?
I think if I can answer that to start off with, and then James or Simon may want to come in on this. The nature, we have looked at that and we've had extensive discussions. Simon and I have sat over many tables on this very issue. And Graham's been part of that discussion as well, because obviously we want to learn the lessons from the TfL approach. The challenge is that, again, it comes back to the size of our buildings, and we don't have that land available to be able to generate the revenue through a retained approach. The majority of earnings that I think TfL, and Graham, you may want to comment, earn is both through their retail portfolio and through their advertising. Clearly, we don't have either. There is the opportunity potentially in through the PRS type of approach, but again, from a PRS perspective, you have to get to a certain mass before it's actually viable. And all bar one of our sites are too small for that approach. There is one site which we are looking at, and we will starting conversations with Simon and James, and may well be bringing Graham in with that expertise because it is a larger site. It has the potential of about 200 units on it, but that's probably our largest.
Okay, thank you. James,
Assembly Member Cooper. And then
Just
yeah.
very briefly to Matthew, if I may. I'm just slightly surprised because Assembly Member Pigeon mentioned this earlier, that you're still saying that all of the sites are so tiny, because whilst the buildings obviously don't have the access problems that some of the TfL sites do, because clearly it would be quite difficult if you had to climb down a bank to get into a police station, so they all have sort of road access in that sense. A lot of them do have very large car parks behind for the very large number of vehicles that officers use. So once you take the car parks into consideration, the overall footprint of some of the sites I would have thought must be larger. I mean, if I just think in my own backyard of Merton and Wandsworth, the police are currently still occupying Earlsfield Police Station, but there's a very large parking area behind it, or Wimbledon Police Station, possibly even larger, than the one at Earlsfield. I mean, and other sites which have been sold now definitely did have very large areas for parking. Are we really saying that we couldn't get anything more substantial into any of these sites? I just find that quite hard to believe.
Yeah, that's a good question. And we've sat down with our advisors and gone through every single site that we are looking at as potentially surplus, and made an assessment of massing on each of the sites. And some of the sites we've actually done massing studies on to see how much we can get on those sites. Your point about car parking is very valid. The Earlsfield is a very good example. Earlsfield, a red brick Victorian building with a large car park out the back. It is where one of our main emergency response and patrol teams come out from, and we have numbers of those types of units. We currently have about 6,500 parking spaces across our estate, and we need about 5,400 at a minimum to be able to occupy. So quite a lot of the buildings we're looking at are not those buildings where we have large lumps of parking. There are some, and we have made assessments in those areas, but it still means that you, even at some of those smaller sites, the physical location and the site boundary will inevitably mean that you can't get more than 50 units. That's where our sort of threshold, the 10 to 50 units, sits. So I think that's our real challenge. But we have done detailed analysis across those sites.
Okay.
Assembly Member Duval, and I think we're going to move on.
Just for clarity, you mentioned that you'd raised 940 million in the past programme. The new programme, you mentioned that there's a target of 300 odd million. Is that what you expect to raise then, or is that?
Yes, we expect to be in the region of 300 million. Now, clearly, we would like to exceed that. And as we go through, we will be certainly looking, and the question we've just had in terms of massing, as we look at each particular site, we then do much more detailed massing studies on each site. So there is the potential for higher value, but I think at a prudent level at this stage, 300 million is a reasonable target. I think, sorry, just one last point. We don't have any of those prize assets anymore. So, the 55 acres at Hendon and NSY, the value is maximised. Our other prize assets, if you want to call them that, are going to be retained as fully operational, whether it's Lambeth HQ or the new Scotland Yard or other buildings. But we don't have any of those assets coming out to be available.
And presumably, in terms of the list of assets that the Met has, after this programme, have you got any more assets for disposal then? Is there a third programme after this next wave? How much more have you got?
Well, that's an interesting question, because if you'd asked me that question when I set the estate strategy out for 2013 and 16, I would say, and we will be at capacity at this point. And we are. So we are, every single building bar the four we've talked about are fully used. The challenge is that, or the benefit now is the fact that new technology allows us to work in a very, very different way, and a sort of completely cultural approach. Now, if there is some form of new technology that happens in 4 years' time, perhaps something may change. But I have to say we are now down to, we will be down to a very lean estate with still the ability to flex. We have kept space within our estate, future estate, for projects and flex space. But I think we would need to look at specifics as they come through, and taking more space and less space when we need it. But I can't say what the new technology or other new approach might be in 4 years' time.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move on to TfL in just a moment. The Deputy Mayor needs to leave.
I've actually rescheduled so I can stay. That's yeah. So.
Spectacular professional. You're not the only one being professional. So.
Thank you. So I have to think of some very awkward questions then.
Okay, we're going to do a bit of a deep dive into TfL now. And as with the Met, some of these questions have already been covered in some of the preliminary Q&A. We're going to start off with Assemblymember Pigeon and then move on to Assemblymember Cooper. But Assemblymember Pigeon.
Before I get into that, I just wanted to ask something that crosses both, just as a general question to police, well, I guess everyone here, about the impact of Brexit and what that, if you've started to notice any impact on actually being able to sell the land in terms of the value, but also then in terms of the costs of actually building and developing it, whether that is starting to become an issue or whether you're predicting it will be an issue. Maybe Graham, you've done quite a few over the last year.
No one really knows what the long-term impact will be. Clearly there's been some softening of the market, particularly in prime residential in central London.
Yeah.
I think that's generally been recognised. I think it does end up, all these things do, coming down to individual sites. There certainly isn't anything that is a broader market perspective that is a simple catch-all. We do spend a lot of time, given our portfolio, as a point that was raised earlier. We've got almost more ability than any organisation in order to resequence the sites we bring forward. So there's a huge effort that now goes in. We've got independent market analysis that we pay for. We've also got CDAG, the Commercial Development Advisory Group, and of course we've also got our 13 framework partners. So a huge amount of the effort that we expend is in understanding what's the right sequencing of sites. Out of all the sites that we've got, depending on whether the movement is to inner London or central London or east or west or central or residential, whatever it is, we need to be in a position, given the targets we've got, in order to make sure we're working in the right sequence. In practice, there's no one out there who knows, no one I've yet met, who knows exactly how things are going to work out. What I would say is, if there's any wood nearby, we have been able to hit the targets over the course of the last 12 months, and we're still hopeful sat here that we can hit the targets over the course of the next 12. Clearly, the industry is one that sees marked cycles. Part of what I'm keen that we do, part of what we've been working on, is what can we do in order to provide more stability, more certainty, be in a position in which we can plan for the long term and maybe think about the sequencing in order to ensure there's a more regular stream of work. Because, and again, Simon mentioned the difficulties of skills and construction skills. The cyclical nature of the industry means you don't necessarily at any point have quite the skills that you require at that particular phase in the cycle, and that's something that, given the land holdings that we've got, given the opportunity to think more broadly about land holdings in London, an important legacy would be the ability to plan for long term, including on things like skills.
It's not having an immediate impact yet. You haven't immediately noticed anything yet, anyone?
On individual sites.
Not on individual sites. I mean, I could have said more anecdotally across the market, but not on individual sites. I mean, I could talk about that. That might be a bit off topic to talk about Brexit
I just wanted to just get a feel in terms. Just in terms of your planning, though, I was just thinking if you're the work.
I think to echo Graham's point, in terms of it's too early to tell yet, but also to do with where the Mayor's land is, it's not within the prime central zone of London. It is within zones 2 to 6. So
it's not being impacted. Same with Met's.
Yeah,
because actually the bigger picture
we've not seen anything. Sorry.
I was going to say, because as to build on what Simon says, the bigger picture is that it's those high-end properties, it's above £1 million, where people are wondering what's happening, whereas the mid-market is pretty strong. Yeah. And so, given where our sites are, it's less likely to be impacted. Sorry.
Same for you.
We're seeing the same thing at that top-end market. We may well have to change strategies, but we will change strategies to adapt. But again, as you say, that's middle market. I mean, it's less Brexit and more stamp duty is the issue.
Okay, that's helpful. I just wanted to get that on the record. Right, start off with Transport for London. I know we have talked about some of this, but Graham, could you just outline what are TfL's priorities for the use of surplus land? Where are these set out? Is there a clear strategy? And maybe just outline what land and property you have.
Okay.
So the overall objective begins with our business plan. That sets out £850 million worth of receipts through to 21-22. And we have to hit those numbers. That revenue is assumed, and should we not hit those numbers, there is a potential impact on our ability to reinvest to improve the transport system. Clearly, since May of last year, we've also had the target of 50% affordable housing, and I've said that's now captured within TfL's scorecard, which is due to be coming to our Finance Committee and then Board, and that flows down through to me and my team. We also have targets in relation to improving the accessibility of the transport network, particularly through providing things like step-free access, and there's great opportunities at stations like Harrow on the Hill and South Ken, where you've got the ability to recycle revenues produced from development in order to fund step-free access at those stations and elsewhere. More broadly, there's an important piece in terms of legacy and placemaking, and clearly, again, also driven from the Mayor are the targets, the ambitions that we have in terms of low carbon energy efficiency, and make sure the developments we've got are sustainable. That's a broad range of targets, I'm conscious of that, but ultimately, the portfolio that we've got is extensive, it's across London. It's important that we deliver the right outcome in the short term in terms of doing our bit to address the housing crisis that London has, to reinvest in the transport network, but also you have to take that long-term view. You have to be conscious of the scale of opportunity here and make sure that we make the best of it that we can. In terms of land holdings, it is, as we have discussed before, 5,700 acres. We've identified 300 acres for development. Having identified that 300 acres, we're not stopping there. A next wave of activity is then to go back round all of the land holdings that we have and think about TfL's land holdings from an estate management point of view. We've got 27 depots, so then getting into the detail across all of the estate that we had, are there activities that could sensibly be centralised, things like storage, distribution, what might that look like, might that unlock other sites, think about things like energy distribution. This isn't a short-term route to identifying land. We've already got probably a decade or more worth of land that we've identified, but to be ready for the next wave of activity beyond that, that does mean going through in huge detail all the land holdings that we've got and understanding where there may be longer term opportunities. And again, it comes to things like the placing of substations, and is there a mechanism when those things are renewed to ensure they're placed in a way that enables other sites to be unlocked. So we have enough development sites to keep us busy for a long time yet, even with accelerating the programme, but conscious of the scale of the land holdings that we've got. We're also undertaking work that means that the second and third waves of development activity, there will be sites available. 300
sites at the moment are the ones that will take up to a decade and are relatively more straightforward, and then your 5,000 that's acres, sorry, not sites, 300 acres,
yes.
And then 5,400 acres, you're then going to go and review, and a bit like we heard from the police, as operations change and whatever, looking at opportunities to then dispose of sites.
Exactly. Also recognising the fact, there will be, in due course, Bakerloo Line Extension, hopefully Crossrail 2. We'd still like to see metroisation take place.
Yeah.
There will be other land holdings coming into TfL and/or opportunities that further investment in the transport network may help to unlock.
Fantastic. And then what proportion of that 300 acres are you looking to use for revenue generation?
I'm trying to think of an answer that's not all of it to some extent.
Well, no, I mean, if that's the case, you know, the majority of it, that's your plan.
Well, it's about, we touched on it earlier, this portfolio-wide view, the prioritisation of some sites to deliver high levels of affordable housing whilst others generate net revenues. I think James and Simon in particular have set out the mechanism through which that's done on a site-by-site basis. I guess I would just build on what they're saying by emphasising the fact we've got two targets to hit. You know, there is ultimately a spreadsheet here, elements of which may be commercially sensitive, but we have to be at the point where we're able to hit both of those numbers. We're not going to fail on either of them, and that means understanding what the options are on a site-by-site basis, but always be reflecting back as to what does that then tell us about the overall totals that have to be hit. And it isn't the case that we'll be bringing forward sites in which we don't care about affordable housing provision in the same way that, you know, even without the legal obligations, we have to be conscious of the opportunities to think about revenue, even on those sites that may be prioritised from an affordable housing point of view.
Okay, thank you.
So that's quite a complex set of targets that you're setting yourself, isn't it? Which we can look for in the business plan, but also in the scorecards. And you just very clearly said, Graham, that we can't fail on any of them. So bearing that in mind, and we've had some discussions about this in the past in terms of the personnel within TfL, presumably you've now got quite some team of people who've got the necessary skill set to be able to undertake this work of income generation, the commercial aspects, improving accessibility, but then also making sure that we're delivering on the Mayor's housing ambitions. How many people approximately are now working on all of that?
Within commercial development there is, as it happens, 178 people. Within the development team specifically, that's grown from 5 to 25 really over the course of the last 18 months. We've got other people coming in. I think there's 5 roles that we have recruited, and those people are coming in. But in addition to the core development team, again, just to emphasise, we have dedicated support in terms of planning, in terms of legal, in terms of procurement, in terms of communications, in terms of engineering. You couldn't do this if you were just thinking about having development surveyors. The whole organisation needs to be behind this, and we also need, and thankfully have, the support of the wider GLA and indeed other members of the GLA family. This is going through what we're going through is a major undertaking. It's not something to be done lightly. It's not just a question of bringing in development surveyors. You have to have an organisation and an infrastructure that buys into what it is you're trying to achieve. And you need a number of different parts, both of TfL, but the wider GLA family, to be absolutely committed to doing what needs to be done.
So that's quite a long list, and a lot of those are quite technical. How easy has it been for TfL to find the people that it needs to come in with that planning, that valuation, the legal, the engineering backgrounds?
The hardest people were the first ones to find. We didn't have a great reputation in the marketplace, to be honest. If you go back in this particular area, if you go back 4 or 5 years, we're at the point where you bring in capable people, they demonstrate what can be done. It then becomes gradually easier to recruit people. The reputational elements, the delivery is critical, not just in terms of achieving this year's targets, but also making sure it becomes gradually easier over time in order to recruit the people who you need. And we wouldn't have been able to make the progress we have done over the course of the last 12 months had it not been for the groundwork that was done over the course of the last 2, 3, 4 years. Increasingly, it becomes more straightforward over time, but that's driven, we've got a great asset base, of course we have, but ultimately you need to bring in very capable, very experienced people. And if you've got great people in great sites, it's not surprising you can generate great results.
Sorry,
just to intervene, I beg your pardon. property development is a very commercial field, and the kind of people that work in property development are very well commercially incentivised, if I can put it that way. Have you encountered any problems in recruiting the calibre of people that you need by dint of the fact that Transport for London is essentially a public sector organisation?
We have gone beyond TfL's norms in terms of pay in order to recruit people. We have provided people with a bonus arrangement, incentivisation arrangements that are more akin to those you would find in the private sector. We have not sought to sort of match the top end of the private sector in terms of the salaries we're offering, but we are offering more than TfL would have offered in the past. In general, the way we're able to recruit, however, is not by offering more than the private sector, but it's the quality of assets that we've got, and we've been able to sell to people the opportunity in order for them to come in and transform London. And by doing so, and by sort of setting that very clear vision, people who would previously never have countenanced coming to work for an organisation like Transport for London from a development point of view now see that this can be, actually a huge boost to their long-term career opportunities, because if they're in the position to be able for the rest of time to say, I was the person who delivered that, one, it gives them hopefully an enormous sense of self-worth, but also if they are commercially driven, actually they can take that experience and they can take that legacy and then use it themselves.
Point of intervention for me, and I'm going to pass it back to Assembly Member Cooper. Transport for London is sort of a hybrid organisation, isn't it? It was thrown together in 2000 when the Mayoralty first came to being. And what you're attempting to achieve in your directorate is very much outside what would traditionally be regarded as Transport for London's core business. You mentioned in one of your earlier answers that in order for you to succeed, it's very important that the entire organisation gets it and gets behind what you're trying to do. Are they? And how difficult a process has it been to get them there?
Increasingly, they're getting it. And I think, huge progress has been made in the last 5 years, I think, since we first set up commercial development. In essence, all we're trying to do is to take TfL back to where it was. You think about Metroland, 100 years ago, the relationship between transport and development was understood. It's still, you can see, the leading examples in the world, MTR in Hong Kong, JR East in Tokyo. There are transport organisations that have no difficulty whatsoever reconciling the fact that as major commercial enterprises, property companies, you can take the proceeds that come from unlocking sites and reinvest that in order to improve the transport network. Now we're not anywhere near the level that MTR and JR East are in terms of what they've been doing for now, 20 years or so. But we've made huge progress over the course of the last 5 years. The fact that I sit at TfL's executive committee, so commercial development is represented at TfL's top table, that would never have happened 5 years ago, and that's a huge signal inside and outside the organisation that this is something that is important to the organisation. That's not just important in terms of the work that we do, but it's also a signal to the wider market that if you've got a site that adjoins TfL, well, here's an organisation that increasingly the engineers are willing to think about, or are keen to think about, how can we help to unlock development more broadly. And it's that the next wave of activity isn't just what we can do with our sites, but also what we can do with adjoining interests, particularly, but not just in the public sector. How can we increasingly take advantage of the fact that our assets, by definition, are stations, the most connected places in London, at the heart of London's town centres. This is the opportunity that we can unlock here. Of course, there's a financial value, but it's much, much more important than that.
Okay, somebody else.
I would agree with that, although I think Network Rail still need to be brought to the table in a slightly more extensive way. My impression still is that they tend to create a blockage, and obviously they quite frequently have assets that are very close to TfL. But if I can just turn to your willingness, given the additional staff and expertise that's been brought on board, I assume that that is something that TfL is happy to share across the GLA family, you know, with MOPAC or LFIPA or the other parts of the family.
Indeed, and I've mentioned that, but the answer will not always be that TfL is the best place in order to manage that. We've had conversations about small sites with the GLA. Myself and Matthew have talked about the expertise that the Met Police have in terms of its operational property estate. This is about how best, from a purely pragmatic point of view, where best are the results driven from, and that by no means will always be within Transport for London.
You've talked a bit, and Simon and James have referred to this, that there's a sort of bespoke or nuanced approach to the very wide range of sites. Are you able, at this point, to give us some sort of picture of what you're planning to do with the surplus land over, let's say, the next 5 years? Or is it so different on a site-by-site basis that it's hard for us to right now understand how many of those would be sort of more balanced towards housing, which might be more balanced towards the commercial, which are the ones where you might be realising more of the capital receipt, which are the ones where you might be planning to have more of the revenue income coming in over those 5 years? Is that something that we can do yet?
To some extent. I mean, particularly over the course of the next 12 months. You know, so we're working up the sites over the course of the next 12 months. The most important site for us next year to come forward will be Limmel, near Canning Town. That's an 11-acre site. So that's, you know, probably the largest site that we'll bring forward over the course of the next 3-4 years. That's a huge opportunity to create, given that scale, a sense of place. There's opportunities to have some PRS to generate revenue alongside some property that we will develop and dispose of. Again, given that scale of activity, there's that scale of site, there's an opportunity for commercial, residential and retail. That's at one end of the spectrum, but that's certainly over the course of the next 12 months the sort of the largest site we've got coming forward. Other sites coming forward over the course of the next 12 months that we would seek to bring forward to market: Golders Green, Northwood, Paddington, Parsons Green, Southall, small sites. So we can talk in some detail about the plans for the next 12 months. Meanwhilst, you know, the team back in TfL and the new people who we're bringing in are then starting to work on the sites for the year after and the year after that. So there's a limit in terms of the detail we can get into, because we've still got, well, I think in total we've got 48 sites that are currently being worked on, but the majority of those are in the feasibility stage. Not all of those might be able to be brought forward, but you know, that's the range of activity that we've got going on. So it's a long answer, but at a high level, I can say the vast majority of our sites will be residential. There will be some large commercial sites, places like Southwark, Bank, of course, Farringdon, Edgware Road. So at a high level, I can say what I'm expecting in terms of sites, but in terms of the detail, that will always, I suspect, tend to be available more in terms of the course of the next 12 months.
I think certainly from the point of view of this committee, it would be very helpful for us to kind of have something that, I mean, and obviously we understand to a certain degree there is a movable feast element. If you're doing a feasibility and it then becomes apparent during the course of the feasibility that, you know, some element of what you were originally planning is just not possible. But I think having that overview so that we can see the forward movement would be very helpful.
My one caution, on that, is I am also conscious of the fact that if we're starting to announce years in advance which sites we're looking to bring forward, there's always the danger, the certainty in fact, that someone will then come along and try and buy up interest round about. So that's why it's always much easier to talk about what's happening over the course of the next few months rather than the course of the next long-term period.
Clearly we understand that, and you know, it's something that over the years that people have you know, tried to purchase ransom strips or whatever you want to call them, and obviously we wouldn't really want to create something that then becomes a barrier for us down the line. So obviously we want to be...
To the extent that we can, really more than happy to share.
That would be helpful. And then just to perhaps to Simon, but also Rebecca and Matthew, thank you very much for staying on the line for the whole of this. I think we're coming to the end now. I mean, we've just heard from Graham about the development of the staff within TfL and having that necessary team. Is that something that you're planning for in terms of the development at the GLA or in MOPAC? I don't know whether James wants to come in on that at all as well.
Sorry, in terms of the
having the necessary commercial staff who've got that full range of abilities so that you can achieve across housing, commercial, capital receipts, and then also the revenue income, as well as the carbon issues as well that we were talking about.
I mean, certainly within the GLA and the Housing and Land team, there's quite a lot of experience from all the sites which have been taken to market over the last 4 years. But just to link back to the earlier discussion we were having about this kind of skills and capacity audit, looking across not just Housing and Land team, but also all the functional bodies, where are the gaps? Either in terms of capacity, just in terms of number of people, just to kind of do the work, or in terms of specific skills. Like, do we need specific skills in terms of land assembly, in terms of any commercial operations? Where are the extra skills we need there? And then on that basis, where do we need to bring in extra resources or make sure that specialist services are concentrated in the right place within the GLA family? So I think we start from a position where I would say we have quite a strong basis to start from, but it's absolutely right that we have that kind of thorough audit to work out where the gaps are, to strengthen ourselves going forward in terms of bringing forward GLA Group Land, but also in terms of the wider role that we want the kind of Homes for Londoners umbrella team to work on, working with councils, with private sector landowners and so on to bring forward their sites more quickly.
Thank you. Okay. Whether anyone else wants to add to that?
It's something. It's a good question. It's something I keep very much under review. From MOPAC's side, our new Chief Financial Officer, she has significant experience in strategic finance and has just come from NHS Imperial Trust, which has a very complex estates programme. But I think James's work on a skills audit and overall collaborative approach to working is very, very effective, because then we can problem solve using all the skills in the wider family.
Matthew, you look like you wanted to intervene.
I think from our perspective, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, we draw in our from an outsourced type approach in terms of Knight Frank providing the actual disposal skills. Our skill base is really enhancing our big program skills internally in order to get out of the buildings. And that's where I'm looking to substantially enhance our ability because of the nature of what we do and how we're going to be changing.
Thank you.
Okay, members, I'm conscious of time. I think we could probably carry on talking about this for a couple of hours, but not every guest has a couple of hours.
James has now. So.
We will be writing to all of our guests afterwards, because I think there's been some additional information that we've requested that has been promised in writing, so we'll get back to all of you. Can I thank all of our guests? Can I thank particularly the Deputy Mayor for rearranging his schedule to be able to take this? And I have to extend specific thanks to Matthew Punchin for sacrificing a morning on the slopes. I hope you're able to get a couple of hours in with your skis on this afternoon.
I'm looking forward to it.
I'm sure you are. And can I just say that when you dropped your headset...
Could I extend those thanks actually to the bow tie team, actually, because they've been brilliant at setting this up, because it's been a bit of an experiment, so they've been brilliant.
Yes, it's worked very well. Although dropping your headset earlier on did reveal that you have the newsreader's approach to shirt and tie, which is shirt and tie and jeans.
I had to get my jeans on.
Yes, indeed you have. But at least
I was running out of battery.
At least it's not Salapex. That would have been a bit too hot. Okay, can I thank all of our guests? Normally I would inflict the rest of the meeting on all of you, but I appreciate you've all stayed over time, especially Matthew. So I'm going to pause the meeting for 2 minutes. We have some other items of business which we run through very quickly, but if guests want to leave, they are free to do so. Now would be your time if you wish to.
Okay, thanks.
Poor man. Look at that practicing. This call, that was them obviously tried yesterday.
Oh God, it's going to drop, but it didn't.
Okay, members. Guests are gradually filtering out the door, so I think we'll just finish the meeting off. To conclude item 5, we are recommended to note the report and the discussion. Is that agreed? Thank you. Item 6 is the Budget and Performance Committee work programme for the remainder of the year. We're requested to, or recommended to, delegate authority to me in consultation with group leads to decide the terms of reference for the committee meetings in May, June and July 2017. Is that agreed?
Agreed, plus me, because I'm not a group.
Including Assembly Member Pigeon, who we obviously wouldn't dream of overlooking. Item 7 is the date of the next meeting, which is subject to the confirmation of the AGM on the 3rd of May 2017. The date of the next meeting will be Tuesday the 23rd of May at 10 o'clock in this room. Item 8 is any other business that I consider urgent. There is one item which is listed under agenda item 9, which is the Mayor of London's Capital Spending Plan 17-18. Now this report was received on the 27th of February. The reason that I agreed to take it as an urgent item is so that you can all have sight of it in today's papers. We haven't fully been through all of it yet, but when we go through it, we may identify some things that we'd like to examine in more detail, in which case, as I indicated under item 6, we would actually circulate that amongst the group leads and possibly bring a paper forward to a future meeting. Are you happy to note that report and also what I've just said about that?
Great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, members. There is no further business. The meeting is closed. Well done.
Good. Interesting.
Oh, it's
Really interesting.